On today's chase case, we're going to take a look at what happens when you have two really good, viable targets to pick from. We're going to dissect both, and we're going to make a decision and live with it as we chase an incredible supercell. And we're going to have a lot of fun doing it. Are you ready? Let's go. It's late May in 2018, and we've got an enhanced risk. That's what we're waking up with today. As usual with these chase cases, we're going to start here because it just makes a lot of sense to set the table for the day and give a little bit of context for what we're chasing. You can see at marginal risk actually runs all the way back up into southeast Wyoming and eastern Colorado, but we're not focusing on that today. We're focusing down here in the southern plains on this enhanced risk. You can go look at the tornado probabilities. It's a 5% risk day. That means, that's not nothing. It's a day where you could reasonably expect a tornado or two. That 2% is more like a tornado could happen today. It's not, it's not a 0% chance, but a 5% is where you can start saying, yeah, we could probably see a tornado or two in this area today. And then you see the 30% hell risk, which is also hatched. That means they're expecting a decent chance of some 2-inch or larger hailstones in that area. That's a really good sign for some good, robust updrafts. Usually, especially in late May, means that you're looking at supercells and some pretty robust supercells at that. So today, it looks primed. We're getting ready to chase. Let's make it happen. The first place we're going to start for this chase case outside of the SPC outlook are morning soundings. If you haven't done so, check out our Intro to SKUTs course to get caught up on what we're looking at here. So a couple of things I want to draw your attention to. The first one, the shear is pretty good. Winds are kind of weak, especially that weakness between 500 and 850, but there's a really strong cap on this. This is the Lamont, Oklahoma sounding. It's right smack dab in that 5%, but the cap, it is pretty strong. Convective temperature is quite a ways up there. Anytime you start a day with a cap that looks really strong, it's not, all hope is not lost. You can remove a cap, remember, with heating, with lift, with cooling in the upper levels, all these things can combine. Again, we don't really use models in these just yet, mainly because it's hard to find archive models, but models are showing that the cap will eventually break, but you're looking at pretty isolated storms. And so the morning sounding really does give you a good picture that you're going to need a little bit of work to get this cap overcome. You're not going to get to that high temperature of 97, for instance, but we're going to get there. There's a lot of confidence in that today. And just a quick update at this point for the 1630 outlook, the enhanced risk has been shifted south a little bit. So that's important, but it helps narrow our target a little bit. We're about to look at the dilemma for the day. As you eat your breakfast burrito for the morning and prepare to chase, if you take a look at the satellite image, there's some really interesting things going on today. First off, there's an outflow boundary. It's pretty clear there along the Oklahoma-Kansas border, also clear on OBS. So there's this outflow boundary. And remember from our Chester lesson that outflow boundaries they're a pretty significant thing. But there's something different about this outflow boundary that I think this makes for a fascinating case study because we have to decide if we're going to chase this outflow boundary or the dry line further south. You have the cap to worry about. Will a storm go? If you feel confident in a storm on the dry line, which we do, so now you got two targets that are definitely going to produce storms. Which one of them is the best target? Now this is where it gets complicated and harder to kind of ascertain, like what am I going to do? So taking a look at another set of OBS, let's just say you're setting somewhere in between the dry line and the outflow boundary at this point in the middle of the afternoon. There's a pretty good, the outflow boundary has 66 dew points, but the dry line is setting there at 64. There's not much of a difference here. And in fact, if you switch over to dew point spreads, you see they're also pretty similar. They're both actually kind of high for tornadoes, which is the reason why you have a 5% risk and not something like a 10% localized on that outflow boundary. The temperature dew point spreads are pretty high. You're going to have relatively high cloud bases with any supercell. So you got to start asking yourself, all things being equal, do I pick this outflow boundary? Well, there's one other thing you need to look at. As we head back to the outflow boundary and back to soundings, if you take a look at this Lamont sounding from the early afternoon, I know we're bouncing around in time, just bear with me for a second, but let's say you're looking at this for the first time at 3 o'clock, just because, why not? You look at it, you see the cap has weakened considerably. I can't stress enough that keeping an eye on soundings throughout the day is very important, because now you have a situation where this cap is indeed stronger along the dry line and it's weaker along the outflow boundary. Now the outflow boundary is going to create a lot of convergence, and my gut feeling is that outflow boundary is going to result in a pretty gnarly supercell, and you could get a tornado or two, but my gut says that this thing's also going to go very, very HP very quickly, because you're going to get storms continually forming along that outflow boundary. And if that's the case, and there's a beautiful isolated storm on the dry line, I'm going to be pretty sad. I love isolated supercells, isolated dry line supercells especially. So I'm headed to the dry line. Could be a mistake, but we're going for it. The first rule of storm chasing is not to panic. That outflow boundary is starting to initiate at 3 o'clock. I could understand if you're getting a little antsy and worried, but look out there west of Pampa. The dry line has some towering Q taking off. It'll be okay. Even though one target's initiating earlier, it'll be okay. You have to set still and wait for things to happen sometimes. And as we arrive, there are towers going up everywhere on this dry line, and some really good bases. You have to really be patient at this point. Sometimes when you have a stronger cap, storms are going to take a little bit to really get going, and today it's definitely one of those days with a really strong cap in place. These updrafts are going to kind of do their thing for a little bit, and eventually one of these is just going to rocket up, and you're going to have a big time supercell. As I drive south, you can see this anvil is rock hard. There is an updraft on the southern end of this that's just rocketing up. This is the storm. The radar evolution of this storm is classic. Single updraft takes over the environment, kills everything around it, and just takes over. You can see it happening here as everything around this cell dies, and it just becomes dominant. This storm is continuing to take shape. As it approaches Mobile, Texas, there's a big scud bomb underneath this updraft. It's rising up. This is eventually going to be our wall cloud. You can also see dust blowing out away from the updraft. That's because these are high cloud bases. Whenever you get a supercell that's got a big, tall cloud base, you're always fighting that downdraft, that outflow from the core to get a nice wall cloud, get a relatively stable area of rotation. It's always a battle. But today, we're going to see if this thing can work itself out. Another thing that has become painfully obvious, this storm has turned hard right, and as a tornado warning is issued on it, everything about this storm is starting to scream, hey, look at me. So, oh my gosh, this storm is beautiful as we roll into Mobile, Texas. Look at this. You can see how high the ambient cloud base is, but you can see that lowered area underneath. Supercells in big cape environments create their own local environments. Every time you see it, all the time when there's a lot of cape, this storm has turned hard right, which means it's locally increased its shear, but it's also locally lowering its cloud base thanks to the rain-cooled downdraft air. This happens all the time, and it's why when you get big cape and just enough shear for supercells, it always means chase. Now this storm is having difficulty. We got a little closer here. It's having difficulty maintaining a low level lowering. Again, that's because the low levels are dry. These cloud bases are high. These storms oftentimes do this. You always have to be on the lookout though, because when you get a supercell this big time, they can sometimes wrap up really quickly. And we're looking west here, so if the storm's moving southeast, you can guess that core is getting really close. Wanting to kind of stay here just for a bit, just to watch this wall cloud try to take shape. It's obviously not going to do anything just yet, so it's time to head back east and get a better road to stay away from those baseball hailstones. And just to show how much storms will change in just a few short minutes, this is probably 15 minutes of time passing. This storm looks way different, way more organized. Here's the updraft. Obviously supercell, but you can see, look underneath that. It's really ragged right now, but that base has lowered considerably. The RFD, that's that rain behind that lowered area. This is a dry, classic type of supercell, and it just looks strong. Lots of lightning. You can see it right there on the right side. Of course, yours truly is setting up a camera. This is big. This is starting to really, really look like a tornado producer, actually. And you can see it now, that area precipitation associated with the rear flank downdraft is wrapping around the low-level mesocyclone. You're actually starting to look a little HP even. This is when it happens. This is when you need to be ready, because it is tornado time. If it's going to happen, it's happening in the next few minutes.
I got a funnel halfway down, guys.
For a brief bit, the rain really made it hard to see, but you can see it right there. It's still really hard to see. There's a lot of rain between me and the funnel, but there is a funnel cloud now that is more than halfway down to the ground. It's obviously occluding at this point, but man, look at that. This storm this was actually reported as a tornado by local emergency managers who were closer and could see actual ground circulation. So hey, good job everybody. We nabbed a tornado on the dry line with this storm today. Now after the tornado, this storm really gusted out. Look at this. This was strong northerly winds out and away from that low-level mesocyclone. This thing's been undercut, at least for now. And to briefly check in on the other target, big HP Supercell, but you can see as time has gone on, this thing really got crowded by other storms. So I'm feeling pretty good about our target choice. There was another target that actually produced on this day as well, but it wasn't part of our repertoire. Now, looking at our storm, you can see it's really gotten an unorganized look to it. But if you look out there to the west, there's another supercell forming. So what's going on with this? Why are there now two storms? And if you've watched enough of our videos by now, you know crowding storms is not our forte, or really anybody's forte, because it means that seeing things gets a lot more difficult. HP modes become more likely. But we stopped for a second. We wanted to take a look at this supercell to the west. There's some blowing dust right to the right of that tree. That indicates there's a lot of outflow. This lowering here is actually disconnected from the cloud, and it's really kind of disintegrating and blowing out in a way. All these are signs that this is part of an outflow dominant feature. Now this whole area looks outflow dominant, to be honest. So this western supercell, not feeling it. It's always an option though, so we're going to head east and get back on the eastern supercell and see what happens. So I arrived back on the eastern supercell to find that its base had risen considerably, and it was very flat. This is a classic sign, especially after you've seen outflow surge out from underneath a storm, that you're probably not looking at tornado time. Especially look at that base. There's nothing there indicating any type of lowering or even any attempts at it. So I was pretty resigned to the fact that this was going to be a day that was going to end with just structure, but man, this structure, it was great. So it's at this point that our lead supercell actually was getting caught by the supercell to the west. This next sequence is probably still one of my favorite and most fascinating interactions between two storms I've ever seen, where one storm is absorbed by another supercell, and what results is this massive HP bomb that just took my breath away when it came to its structure. Now for a brief bit as these two storms interacted, there was a bit of a lowering, and you always, when a storm interaction happens, want to look for that. However, this rain was really advancing around the parent updraft, the low-level meso, thanks to these two storms really merging. This was becoming an HP bomb. You weren't seeing anything. Another thing that happened as these two storms merged, the forward motion actually increased quite a bit for a brief time. This kind of caught me off guard a little bit, but we still managed to get a couple of decent views of this thing. Look at that. That area down below the mothership, that's where that's a big HP core. You don't want to be back up in there. That's really big hail, lots of wind. Regardless, even if you wanted to see a tornado today, you're not seeing it in this thing, and even if you did, you're not leaving without major damage to your car. You just give these things a lot of room, and you just enjoy the show from afar, because this is really gorgeous. And just before we left this location, you can see those gates moving. We actually were getting blasted by outflow winds well ahead of this thing. So this was about the sign that today's chase was largely over except for the structure. So we ended up setting off and we were going to try to stay ahead, get a little bit more structure, but our tornado threat was largely over with, and that's okay. But anytime you get skies like this, it's hard to complain. And taking a look at this storm on radar, you can see it weakens, it turns to the left, it loses that supercell shape almost entirely. This storm is done, which means our chase day is also done. So what can we take from this one? The first thing you need to learn is that some days do have multiple targets and there's no way to be in all of them. So you need to pick what you want, stick to it, and enjoy what you get. On this day, there were 3 targets actually. One was in southwest Kansas near Dodge City that I completely overlooked that produced a gorgeous set of tornadoes. Then you had the HP cell in north central Oklahoma along the outflow boundary, and you had my storm, which was in western Oklahoma. So 3 targets, you couldn't be in all 3 no matter what you did, but they all turned out to be okay. Some days are like that. Another thing to learn is that Big Cape, even with high bases, can mean really amazing things happen. This storm formed in an environment with nearly 30-degree dew point spreads, but because of that Big Cape, it created its own environment and it did something really cool. And the last thing, I think it's pretty obvious, but also you want to find where storms are going to be the most isolated. That's always a winner on any chase day. Isolated storms for the win. Hey, did you like this video? I hope you did. Be sure to like, be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.